All right, we are ready to get started. Welcome to the Senior Financial Aid Night. My name is Diane Bourne, and I am one of the post-secondary counselors in District 214, and I'm at Prospect High School. Before we get started, I'd like to make a couple other introductions of our other post-secondary counselors across the district. There is one of us at each of the buildings, and so tonight on this Zoom, we also have Paul Genovese from Buffalo Grove High School, Anthony Myosic from Elk Grove High School, Christopher Chocolus is from John Hersey High School, Kara Fisher from Rolling Meadows, and Joanne Amador Zapata from Wheeling High School. So we are your contacts in each of your buildings as you have any questions related to whether it's financial aid, the college application process, or anything having to do with post-secondary. Before we get started too, I wanted to just tell you a little bit about a new graduation requirement. Public Act 101-180 was enacted by the Illinois General Assembly, and it requires that beginning last year, public high school students must complete the FAFSA or, as eligible, the alternative application for Illinois financial aid as a prerequisite to a high school diploma. So you will be hearing a lot more about this from the post-secondary counselor in your building. There are definitely alternate ways to meet the requirement, but also to waive the requirement if that is what you're preferring. And lastly, I really wanted to tell you about, as I said, our post-secondary counselors, we plan a lot of events throughout the year. Our next events will be our Fafsa Workshops. And so you will certainly get more information from your post-secondary counselor in your building, but save the date for either October 5th or November 10th. Which you will have the opportunity to come to either Elk Grove High School or to Wheeling High School, where we will all be there with a bunch of other volunteers to help you through your FAFSA and to answer any of your questions. So without further ado, I'm going to let Mark share his screen. And while he is doing that, just want to do a little introduction. Mark Anderson has been doing our senior financial aid nights for several years now. We are very fortunate to have him because not only is Mark an expert in the field of financial aid, but he also is a District 214 parent. So Mark, take it away.
All right, thank you, Diane. It really is an honor and a joy to be with you tonight. And I hope that you find the information helpful, informative, and that it helps to clear up some of the either misconceptions you may have or some of the concerns that you have about the financial aid process. So to begin with, a little bit about me. As Diane said, I am a D214 parent. My wife and I have lived in Arlington Heights for 13 years. We've got several Hersey grads from recent years, and we've got 3 more coming up down the pike. Our youngest is in 3rd grade at Olive, and so it's going to be 10 years before I see that graduation and college beginning for her. I've been at Lake Forest since November of 1995. I spent 10 years in Nebraska in college admissions and financial aid before that. And yes, I am a Packers fan. Having grown up in Wisconsin, spent most of my early years there. It just doesn't rub off south of the border. This is a picture from a recent wedding this past summer when Alexa, who's a 2014 Hersey grad, was married. Looking at what we'll talk about tonight, I'll begin by identifying the types of financial aid that are available and where they come from. We'll take a look at some of the terminology that is common, including the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, which is the primary application used across the country for most types of aid. There may be times when the FAFSA doesn't really allow your family to tell all that they think is relevant to their finances. The FAFSA asks specific questions about a past year and doesn't allow you to tell much outside of the box. And so we'll address how you can do that if that happens to be applicable to your family. And finally, we'll explore some of the ways that students can locate private scholarships that will be used to help pay for college costs. Certainly the best kind of financial aid that's available is free, sometimes called gift aid. You don't have to pay it back. You don't have to work for it. Both scholarships and grants fall into this category. And as you see, there are multiple sources for scholarships, including the college or some states and certainly private sources. But because in most cases, the scholarships are based on a student's ability, they're called merit-based funds. It's their grades, it's their prowess on the athletic field or in the fine arts areas, sometimes in a given academic discipline, things of that nature. Each source of money, the provider will give an application with different requirements. Some might require an essay, some might have a letter of recommendation, transcripts, number of things like that that can enter into the process. So be sure to check with each of those sources as to how they determine eligibility. You see a few examples here. Academic scholarships and athletic scholarships are pretty well known and understood. Different processes though to apply. There may be an audition or a tryout. The state of Illinois has a teacher's scholarship, the MTI, for people that are pursuing education as a career field. And as another example of a private scholarship, one of our daughters received $2,500 from CVS Caremark, which happens to be my wife's employer. She submitted an essay and had some letters of recommendation, and her transcripts were all a part of that process. But in addition, then you've got grants, which is another type of free money, but it is need-based. It typically is not looking at a student's grades, although it can. The primary means of eligibility is looking at the family resources and whether or not the family has financial need. It can come from similar sources like the college or the university. The state of Illinois is really generous with, I think it's $480 million in funds going out to state residents. And of course, the federal government also has aid programs that are need-based. For most all of the need-based funds, it's the FAFSA that I mentioned just a few minutes ago as the driving force to determine eligibility. And some examples that you see in the last line, the federal Pell Grant, the state of Illinois has something called the MAP grant, and Lake Forest or individual colleges may have their own grant funds as well. Again, these are just kind of a snapshot of some of the sources that you'll find. Work study is a type of financial aid that you earn. You work a few hours each week. It might be 5 or 10 or 15, maybe 20, but a modest number of hours during the course of the academic year. Most jobs are on campus, although some might be in community service. Each college or university has its allocation of funds. Some might be federal funds, which have to be used for need-based employment, and some colleges have their own funds that can be need-based, that supplement what the federal government gives. They may also have their own funds that can be given to anyone. One of our daughters who was at a school south of Chicago was offered work study even though we didn't qualify for need-based aid. So if that's an interest to you, you can check with the aid office and see if they offer work study regardless of need. When it comes to getting paid for a work study position, you'll find variations in this. It might be that the student is given a paycheck. It may be that they have work study automatically applied to the bill. At Lake Forest, we don't require that the student accept the work position, and so we don't put work study as part of the bill. But if the college or university that your son or daughter is looking at does, you want to make sure that they're aware that they have to put in a certain number of hours each week. There is another type of financial aid that you need to repay. And as the name suggests, it's going to be in a student loan. The federal Stafford Loan is the most common loan program out there. And for those of us in the 50s or so, 40s and 60s in age, the GSL, or Guaranteed Student Loan, is the old name of this program. In years past, when I was in school, the money came from the individual banks. Now it's the federal government that provides the loan. Student is the borrower, and while they're in school, they don't make any payment. There might be interest accruing, as we'll talk about just a minute from now, but no payment is due until typically 6 months after graduation. The government sets the interest rate. It's the same rate for all borrowers. And as you see here, it's a pretty favorable rate at 3.73% for this year, up a little bit from just under 3% last year. Interest rates are set in May in the spring for the following fall. So we won't know next fall's rates for another 7-8 months or so. But again, everybody pays the same interest rate. For each academic year, a student is able to get a different amount of money from the Stafford Loan programs. You see them listed, beginning at $5,500 and capping at $7,500 for the student's junior and senior years. The Stafford Loan is actually divided into two different types. The subsidized, which is need-based, and because it's need-based, a student does not pay any interest on the loan while they're in school. Interest will start accruing at the point of graduation. With an unsubsidized Stafford loan, it isn't need-based. So regardless of family income, you can have literally $1 million of income annually and still qualify for this loan. Because it's not need-based, the government does not pay interest on the loan while the student is in school. So a person who's receiving this kind of money will have interest accruing throughout the 4 years of school, and then has to begin paying the loan again 6 months after 6 months after graduation. In all cases with a Stafford that is subsidized and unsubsidized, any payment can be deferred. With the unsubsidized interest can be paid while they're in school, or they can postpone everything until graduation. There are times when additional loan money might be needed beyond the Stafford loans. And for that, then, one option is the federal parent loan, or PLUS. The parent's the borrower, and it does involve a credit application with a relatively modest or easy credit check that's done. Essentially what happens is that the lender is looking for the absence of significant bankruptcy, lien, foreclosure, significant delinquency on accounts 90 days or more delinquent. That would trigger a denial, or could trigger a denial, in which case the parent still has some options to work around that. Interest will accrue from the beginning, and typically repayment of interest and principal starts 60 days after the loan is dispersed. But it's possible to have no payment made while the student is enrolled at least half time. With like the Stafford loan, the PLUS has a fixed interest rate that is set by the government. It is unique for each academic year, so that people who are borrowing this year pay 6.28%. If they had a loan last year, it was 5.3%, but they'll carry two loans at two different interest rates. And these rates remain the same for the life of the loan. And that's the same for the Stafford loan from the previous screen. That is to say that if you have a loan at 6% as a freshman, it's 5% the second year. You've got two loans, two different rates. The third year, the rate might be 7.5%. Now you've got three loans at three rates, but they all stay the same for the life of that loan. What's different about the parent loan is that instead of having a fixed dollar amount limit, the amount that you can borrow is based on the cost of school and any other aid that the student has received. So for example, at Lake Forest, our cost is about $60,000 for the year. If a student has $40,000 in scholarships, grants, loans, and work study, the parent could get $20,000 from the PLUS loan. If the student has $22,000 of financial aid, they could get $38,000 from the PLUS loan. And that's the same for all colleges and universities. Looking beyond the federal parent loan, there are non-federal loans that can be pursued if you're looking for other ways to pay for college. The first option shown here is a student borrower private loan. It might be Discover or Sallie Mae. Private lenders that have their own loan programs, they create their own interest rates, they establish their own application requirements, their own time frame, and these can be used almost always with a cosigner, and it's the cosigner's credit that determines what the interest rate will be. So if you have, let's just say yourself as the parent, a very good credit rating, let's just say a FICO score of something like the upper 700s, the lender might give you an interest rate of 4.5%. If you as a parent have a parent yourself who would co-sign on the loan, so the student's grandparent, maybe they have exceptional credit and a FICO score of 850. The lender might provide them with a 3 or 3.5% rate. All of those things are determined by the lender, and it'd be important to do some significant homework to be sure that you're getting the best loan that is available to you. So again, it's based on the cosigner's credit. You will find that you've got, in many cases, a choice between fixed interest or variable interest. Like home loans, if you have an adjustable rate mortgage, that rate might be a little bit lower today than it would be if you had a 30-year fixed. Similar with the student loan programs here. Another option listed just for informational purposes would be a home equity loan or a line of credit. Some of you might benefit from the tax benefits there. And so talk with someone who's in the know, a financial planner perhaps, to know if this is really the best way for you to go. How do you apply for financial aid? Generally speaking, there are 2 or 3 options depending on the type of student that you're applying with or for. If the student is a citizen and a permanent resident, they're going to complete the FAFSA. Everybody does that. That's one application that covers virtually everything that is need-based. For students in the state of Illinois who are attending a college in Illinois and they're undocumented, the alternative application for Illinois financial aid is a path to get certain types of funds. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later. As Diane mentioned, one of these 2 applications is a high school graduation requirement in Illinois, and they become available October 1st, so just 10 days away. If you don't fit into one of the categories that I mentioned earlier, for example, if you're undocumented or you're international students and you're going away to another school out of state, there may be something like the Css Profile, or the college or university may have its own application. So check with the school to see specifically what may be required of you in those cases. Otherwise, citizens and permanent residents do the FAFSA. Undocumented students in Illinois will do the alternative application. Just to give you a little bit of an idea of what the applications look like, this is the home screen for the alternative app, available as you see in English or Spanish. It's only used for one aid program, the Illinois MAP grant, because if you are undocumented, you're not eligible for federal grants or student loans. You'll see at the bottom, there is a choice for the academic year. They've got a link just above that with the second red arrow going up, resources and kind of a reference guide for how to complete the application. And the very top, in the top right, you can choose English or Spanish. For most of you, though, the application to complete is the FAFSA. And this is available beginning October 1st at 12:01 a.m. If you want to get started that early, want to get a jump on it. It's also available in English or Spanish. And that is really the best way to go with the online application. It has numerous helps online. There are checks that are done internally by the software so that if you miss something or misreport something that looks out of line with other answers, you'll be prompted to double check the value that you've given. If you choose the other 2 options that are shown just a little bit lower, the paper option or a call-in choice, you won't have that same benefit of confirming accuracy. You also have a slower response time for the completion of the application. That is, from the time it's submitted to the time you get the results will be longer with the paper or the call-in. The FAFSA, though, as a clarification, is used for any kind of need-based financial aid, student loans, grants, work study, and it will be used for both the need-based and the non-need-based student loans that I mentioned, the subsidized and unsubsidized loans. So to clarify then, US citizens and permanent residents, the online application is really the best way to go. What does it look like? To give you just a little bit of an idea what the facts are, it entails something that should be completed by both the student and the parent. Sitting down together, I think, is ideal. We did that with our girls. One parent, one student looking at all the questions. There are about 100 altogether, and while that sounds or may seem a bit daunting, a lot of it, in fact, almost half of it, can be done by the student in something like 20 minutes. If you're a really fast typist, then maybe even 10. But it's name, address, phone number, date of birth, what year will you be in school, what degree are you working on, things like that that can be answered quite quickly. Then you've got a section that deals with what colleges do you want the information to go to. You fill out one FAFSA one time, and it goes out to as many as 10 colleges or universities. So you don't have to fill out 10 applications and send each one to each place, like you might be doing with admission applications. There are also a few questions about the family, and so that section could be done in maybe about 10 minutes. There's a section now dealing with student and parent finances that is a bulk of the significant part of the application that takes time and quite a bit of care to make sure that you're doing everything right. But there are questions about income, questions about savings and investments, and we'll talk about this later, but there is a way to move all of your answers from your tax return that is held by the IRS into the FAFSA. So you don't even have to have your tax return necessarily right at your disposal, although that's still a best option or best practice.
Mark, can I just chime in here? There was a couple questions about what happens if you fill out the FAFSA and then you want to add more colleges later.
Great. We will talk about that a bit later on, but you can put in some schools now, and after the FAFSA is processed, you can add the schools later on. We'll talk about that in detail a bit later. Is there a second question, Diane?
No, I think that should be good for now, because I think you're going to, I know that some of the questions that are coming up, I know you're going to answer them a little bit later too.
Okay. So the FAFSA essentially gets a snapshot of the family's financial position, income, assets, how many in the family, how many in college. It gives a sense then of the family's ability to pay for those college costs, and in turn is used to determine eligibility for federal aid, state aid, need-based loans, non-need-based loans from the college or from the federal government. Here's kind of an abbreviated checklist of the things that you should have available to you. The first is an FSA ID. FSA stands for Federal Student Aid. And so a parent has this and a student has their own. They're two unique IDs, a username and a password. You see the web address to apply for that or to create it, and you can do that as soon as tonight if you'd like. You have to have a social security number to have an FSA ID. And so if you don't have one as the parent, there are some alternatives that we'll talk about a little bit later on, but you can sign a signature page and mail that in and work with it outside of the FSA ID. Everybody else, though, should plan to get that relatively soon. In addition to having the FSA ID, student and parent will be reporting your date of birth and your social on the FAFSA itself. Here, if you don't have the social as the parent, you'll enter all zeros. The FAFSA asks for 2020 income, and we realize that for some families, that's not the best indicator of your current income, but that's what the government wants. And so make sure that you report only 2020 income. It'll be a separate section for parents and then for students. You'll report certain types of assets, the savings account, the checking account, some investments, but not life insurance, not retirement accounts. You'll report some business or farm values, but not all. The instructions will give you some detail on that. You'll see that you don't report your IRA or your 401k values. You don't report the value of your home. If you have a vacation property or something like that, you do put the net worth of that. You don't report a family-owned business or a family farm. a section for the colleges, as you see, and as we talked about briefly, you can list up to 10 colleges, universities on one FAFSA to get the application results. Generally speaking, if you've applied to 6 colleges for admission, put those same 6 colleges in on the financial aid application. We'll get in a little bit more detail, but essentially, if you have, let's say, used up all 10 colleges, in the spaces for all 10 colleges, and you've got a list of 12, the FAFSA gets submitted, and a few days later, you get the results. You can then correct the FAFSA, take off 2 schools from the list of 10, add 2 new schools in, and all 12 will have access to the results of your application. The 2 that you may have taken off to make room for the next 2, that is, 2 colleges were removed and you put 2 colleges in its place, those 2 colleges will still have access to the original application, no matter what. That never changes. If you took 2 schools off and then you make some other correction, like you correct your asset value or you correct your income value, the schools that were taken off would not get that initially, but there's some workarounds as well in that area. To give you a little bit of an idea that you don't have to know all and be all to get through this, there is help available out there. Within the application itself, there are multiple places where you can get clarification on what line to go to of your tax return, where to find the answer, clarification of what they're asking for. So you can click the little help buttons along the way. As Diane mentioned, in October and November, you've got a FAFSA completion night at Elk Grove and at Wheeling High Schools. Individual financial aid offices can take phone calls or emails if you have questions. It happens regularly. We love to get the help, to get the question and to provide the help. So if your son or daughter is thinking about Lake Forest, give us a call. If it's University of Illinois, give their office a call and then you can get best information. In addition, the state of Illinois has an agency called ISAC, the Illinois Student Assistance Commission, and they have events throughout the fall and even early spring to give families some help in this process. The screenshot that I've shown here only shows the 21-22 year. They haven't posted next fall's processes yet or the dates, but they will soon, and you can check there for dates and locations and times. I will say one other thing about that previous slide, and that is the word free help. There will be people out there who can provide you help for a fee, and you're certainly free to use them. Some of them are certainly good, but some we've heard from are less than reputable and don't give clear answers or accurate answers. So be wary of at least some of those. Make sure you've got some good information coming in. Looking at the FAFSA itself, the FAFSA on the web homepage looks just like this. For most of you, you're going to be choosing new to FAFSA in the top right and the start here to begin that process. But once you have started and saved the application, even if you haven't finished it, you'll come back and click the returning user or login icon near the bottom of the screen. A little bit later, I'm going to talk about a caveat that will be useful if you have an older son or daughter, or an older sibling in college in the fall, currently enrolled, and will be returning in the fall of 2022. You can use their application information to kind of pre-complete the FAFSA for the younger son or daughter who's a current senior. Again, we'll get more detail on that in a few minutes. The initial screen on the FAFSA is one where you're going to see a couple of things that delineate whose information is being provided and who you are. The first one, I'm the student and I want to access the FAFSA, or I'm the parent and I'm going to be filling out the form with or for my student. In the screen on the right-hand side, you again see then that you've chosen, I'm the student, I'm going on to the second screen. I want to now begin the process. I'm going to log in as me, the student, and go forward. If I'm the parent and I'm filling out the FAFSA with or for my student, I'll have to put the student's identifying information in and something called a save key. The save key the save key is created by the student. It's a unique code then that the parent can use along with the student's social and date of birth to access his or her FAFSA without knowing the student's login, the Fsa Id, which is the username and password. So a save key can be useful. Student can share that with mom and dad, but you don't want to share the Fsa Id across family members. Again, these screens here just to give you a general idea of what you're going to see, what it's going to look like. Personal information for the student. When you see the words you or your, what is your date of birth? What is your social security number? You want to make sure that you're providing that for the student. Mom, dad, if you're filling out the application, and it's going to be really easy to jump in and put in your phone number or your email address, but it's the student's information. Every once in a while, we get a student who's a high school senior, get their FAFSA in, and it says their birth date is 1958. And it was clear then that that was actually the parents' information. There isn't a match with that date of birth and the student's social, and so the application is kind of kicked out. Just an important thing to check on. In the right-hand screen, you see that there is a section that asks about the student's college choices. And if you don't know the school's federal code, you can find the school by the name, the location, and it will pop up with a 6-digit number called the federal school code. If you do know the federal school code for each of the 6 or 8 or 10 colleges, you can choose the right-hand tab, search by code, and put that code number in, and the school will pop up. You confirm that's a school that you want the information to go to, and then go on to the next screen or to the next college or university. Again, just for sample purposes, you're putting down information about the parent's marital status. It's important to understand that the FAFSA is going to ask about the information for the parent or parents that the student has lived with most in the last 12 months. So in our household, my wife was married before. We've been married for 13 years. Even though I wasn't the biological parent or adopted parent of the 3 older girls, my information went on the FAFSA, as did my wife's. We entered her marital status, which is married because we are married at that time. And all my information, my social, date of birth, my income, my savings and investments go in on the FAFSA as the custodial parent, step parent, regardless of any other agreement that there might be on who pays for college. If I'm the parent and I have not remarried, then it's only my information that goes on the FAFSA. Who's in my household and what is my income? Nothing about the non-custodial parent is asked for in either case, whether the parents are married or remarried. The non-custodial parent, they do not provide anything on the application. To give you a little bit of an idea about untaxed income and how the form will give you a chance to get clarity on what they're asking for, on the right-hand panel, you see a little question mark, and I'm going to try to manipulate that. Over here is a question mark alongside the blank for the answer. Same thing as here and here. And these can be used, then you click on that and it will show you information about what detail they want. Again, the application asks only about 2020 income. And the reason that they do that is that this is the most complete year that almost everybody will have information on. Your taxes were done presumably in August, maybe with an extension, you're still doing it in October, but your tax returns are done, even though it's a year and a half old. The FAFSA has a built-in tool that allows you to pull information from the IRS and populate the FAFSA, called the data retrieval tool. You answer a few questions about who you are, and then it will find your tax record and automatically dump those values in. Great thing about the data retrieval tool is that it greatly reduces the number of errors that may be made in the process of completing the application. And it also reduces the possibility that you might have to verify income later on. Once you have completed the FAFSA, or I should say, once you have linked to the IRS and copied all the answers over, there's just a couple of buttons that you click. One that says transfer my information and transfer it now. You'll see values on the FAFSA that say transferred from the IRS. And with very few exceptions, you do not want to change any of those values because the government or the entity agency has confirmed them to be true. There are just a few exceptions that you'll see within the application, and if those apply to you, then go ahead and do that. If you're not using the data retrieval tool, make sure that you're looking at the exact line references that they are giving in the application. Don't second guess what line to go to. It asks for tax paid, for example, and many times we find that people use a value on their tax return that's lower on the page and should not be used for this purpose. If the year 2020 was not a normal year for you based on income, you can contact the school's financial aid office and we can tell you if there's anything extra that you should submit. A special form, maybe your 2021 tax return when it becomes available, things like that. And again, keep in mind that there is free help available anytime you get questions about the FAFSA, and especially the income questions. When the application is complete, you've answered everything and you've hit the submit button, you're going to get this confirmation page. And it says, okay, this is going to be your name. Congratulations, test. There'll be a few values on the right-hand side and a little bit of what to do next on the in the lower left. You don't need to be able to see these now on the screen. They're probably too small to read, but the idea is it tells you what to keep in mind for the near future. Now, earlier I talked about a time saver. If some of you have a son or daughter who's in college now and will be back in the fall of 2022, my suggestion is to fill out their FAFSA first. You're going in as a returning user. It already has most of the answers provided already. The student's name, date of birth, social, phone number, email address, that kind of thing. And it will allow you to update values or correct values about income, because the current year's FAFSA is asking about 2019 income. The new FAFSA will ask about 2020 income. You can change those values, but you're submitting then the FAFSA for that returning student first. Then when you get this confirmation page for that student, it asks the question, do you have another child who needs to complete a FAFSA? You click yes, transfer my FAFSA information, and this copies everything about the parents into a blank application now for the high school senior who's about to go into school in the fall. Then that student puts in his or her social, name, date of birth, and only his or her financial information, student savings, student income from work, things along that line. So you can pretty significantly cut back on the amount of time that it takes to do the FAFSA because you've only entered the parent values one time.
Mark, there's a couple questions here. If you have twins or triplets, can you do the exact same thing that you were just talking about when you have a sibling already in college?
Yes. Do triplets, let's say at Rolling Meadows High School. You fill out the FAFSA for one with their social, name, date of birth, submit it, you get the confirmation page. You go down to the bottom right-hand side, click on transfer my FAFSA answers. Now do it for student number 2. Finish that one, click the same link, finish for student number 3. All 3 FAFSAs need to be done, one for each student, but you're only providing the parent information one time and then copying it each subsequent time. The other thing that each parent does need to do, though, is to sign the application at the end. The electronic signature on the FAFSA, which is done at the end, is the Fsa Id. So it might be that the student was filling out the FAFSA all the way to the end, parent fills out the income values and the savings values, and then parent provides Fsa Id to authenticate the values that are reported there. Anything else, Diane?
I think most of the other ones I'm going to wait till the end because they weren't right when we were talking about it.
Okay. So once the FAFSA has been submitted, processing typically takes 2 to 3 days, maybe 4. At that time, the student receives an email, and if the parent email has been included on the application, he or she will receive an email confirmation, and it says for the student, here is a link to your student aid report, or SAR. The parent won't get the link because that information belongs to the student. At this point, though, mom and dad or one parent and the student should sit down together and review each line of the the student aid report, make sure that everything is accurate. You'll see a value called an expected family contribution, or EFC, and it's kind of misleading. In fact, I forgot now if it's a year from now or 2 years from now, they're going to change it to a student aid index. But you see here the definition in kind of an orange font. It's used to determine how much the family, how much financial aid you can receive. It's not the actual amount that your family would be providing to pay for school. But you see here in the middle of the page, or a little bit lower, some cutoffs that are used by the federal grant and the state grant program. So if your EFC is below that level, you may qualify. If it's above, you probably will not. The FAFSA is processed, the student aid report comes back to you as the student. Now is the time that you can make a correction. For example, if you intended to say that my income is 100,000, but you put 100,000 and then 2 zeros after it to be the cents, it actually ends up showing that you have $1 million of income. And you may not get the same amount of aid than if you had left off the cents or the extra 2 zeros. Make that kind of correction. You don't update asset values like my savings was $10,000 last month, now it's $6,000. Those snapshots in time are not adjusted, but a correction to an incorrect value. I should have had 10,000, I showed 100,000. You can fix that. And this is the time then when you also, as I mentioned earlier, can add schools or take schools off the FAFSA. If there are more questions about that, I'll be happy to address that toward the end. At this point, each college financial aid office has the results of the FAFSA and the EFC, and we can compare that with the school's cost. Different programs like an engineering degree at one school might cost different than the nursing program, might cost different than the liberal arts program. At Lake Forest, all of our programs have the same cost, but we look at this compared with the EFC to determine if a family has financial need. And so if the cost is different, even though your family contribution is the same, you may qualify for different levels of financial aid. And this next screen gives you, I think, a pretty good example or a sample of how this works. So suppose you're looking at 3 different schools, a community college, a state university, and a private school. Vastly different costs, but the same application went to each of those 3 schools. The same FAFSA has the same EFC. So now the schools are looking at the cost compared to the EFC, estimated family contribution, and the difference is your financial need. So you can see that at schools with different costs, you have greatly different levels of financial need. And in the lower section, different ways in which the college will provide financial aid. Every college and university across the country has different philosophies or policies on how to distribute the aid. But this is a reasonably close set of numbers for 3 different schools in the state of Illinois. And you see then the total aid from the school is quite a bit different because cost is different. State grants are pretty close to the same as our federal grants, relatively close. But the bottom line here is a significant difference in total aid. What does that really tell you? Or at least I hope that you get the idea that even if you're looking at expensive schools, you don't know if it's really going to be affordable until you've gone to the point of receiving the award letter and seeing the detail of how much is grant, how much is scholarship, and how much is going to be left for us as a family. If there's nothing at all that you take away from tonight, I hope that's one of the top things that you remember.
Mark, there were a lot of questions that came in, a little bit of a confusion about the EFC and whether or not is what you're going to have to pay, or what if you can't afford that EFC? And somebody asked, do families ever have a zero EFC? So could you just maybe elaborate a little bit more on EFC?
Sure. The EFC is really more of an index. The government changed it back when I first started in financial aid in 1990. It was a student aid index and a Pell Grant index. It wasn't really what your family is paying, but people didn't understand that, so they changed to this EFC. But it's a measure of your financial strength. It can be zero, it can be 99,999 or above. It isn't how much you need to pay. And so if you see a number that you're kind of panicking about, it says we could pay that, there's no way. Don't be alarmed, because it may not be what you actually pay. It also may be the case that you don't have a zero amount that you actually pay to the school. The EFC on the FAFSA says it's zero, but you may need to pay something out of pocket. It's just an initial indicator of your financial strength. The schools use it, as you see here in this screen, to compare with the cost, get a general idea of how much need there is. But until you get that award letter that spells out exactly what aid you get, you won't truly know what your EFC is, what your real family contribution is at each college or university. Diane, do you think that helps, or is there something more that you would suggest we go into?
I think for now that's good. I know some of the questions, we're going to definitely go to some of these questions at the end, but I also want to put out there that some of them are really, really specific about your individual family situation. And so
Yeah.
there'll be a way at the end where we'll talk about how you can either get in touch with your post-secondary counselor or with Mark as well for some of those a little bit more specific questions.
Yeah, and if you'd like more clarity on the EFC, my phone number will be shown, and you can give me a call. We can talk a little bit about that. For some of you, you want to know sooner rather than later what, in general, you might be able to expect in the way of financial aid. The actual award letter, like what I showed in the prior screen, is only going to come after the student has been admitted and the FAFSA has been received. But if you look on individual college websites, you'll see something called a net price calculator. Just some examples from 3 different schools of what they show on that individual screen. If you complete this, you're going to be providing similar information like 2020 income, current assets, how many in the family, how many will be in college. You're going to get a general idea of how much grant money you'd be able to get from that school. Some will ask about GPA and test scores, and so they'll also give you some scholarship indications. This is just to give you a general idea. It's not an official award, and you want to check with each college to really know what's required for the official award letter before you kind of take that to the bank and count it as substantial or as official. From time to time, after the FAFSA is submitted, a school might ask for some other kind of document. Nationally, about 1 out of every 5 applications is selected for something called verification. For many families, all you need to do is confirm who's in the household next academic year and how many people will be in college in the fall of 2022. If you didn't use the data retrieval that links the IRS to the FAFSA, then you need to provide proof of income with a tax transcript, or in some cases, a tax return. A copy would be acceptable. In most cases, this is just a random selection. You happen to be flagged. Sometimes there is some answers that don't seem to be consistent across the application, and so the government processing center might say, we want to take a closer look at this. Another time in which there may be some other information needed is dependent on the college or university. Some schools ask for a more detailed application called the Css Profile. And as you see, it's only about 10% of the colleges across the country. This gets into a lot more information like prior year income, future year income, healthcare costs, tuition paid for private schools K through 12, things of that nature. Some schools have unique forms that they ask you to complete. There might be University of Wisconsin financial aid supplement, or a school might have its own form that in addition to the FAFSA, everybody completes. That isn't real common. What is more common is an individual application specific to a circumstance that you may have, like what is shown here. A big change of income, large healthcare costs, mom or dad, you're repaying your own student loan, things like that. If you have something like that and you feel it's a significant factor in what you're able to pay for a given year, contact the school, the financial aid office, or look on their website and complete any applicable forms, submit them in the way the school needs, provide your date, time, phone number, and that'll be the starting point. The schools will then oftentimes be able to consider those unique cases or circumstances along with the FAFSA to get a better, probably more accurate award letter to you, taking into account those unique circumstances. The FAFSA has school-specific and in some cases state-specific deadlines. You want to find out from the college, is this an absolute date or kind of a priority target date? For the state of Illinois, almost $5,500 if you qualify, but you also have to meet the deadline. The deadline is announced by the Illinois Student Assistance Commission when they realize that they're close to exceeding the amount of money that's available. The pot is about $500 million. And if they get to June 1st and they say that we've already got an idea that we're going to be spending $480 million on applications, they'll probably close off applications quite soon and say, if your application is after this date, we can't promise an award. Generally speaking, getting the application in by the first of the year, if you're an Illinois resident attending an Illinois school, is going to be a pretty safe estimate. But check with each college or university, they may have an earlier deadline or priority date. Mark them on the calendar, make sure you meet the earliest of those dates. I said we'd also talk a little bit about scholarships and how to find other monies from places outside of the college or university. And here are just a few. Now, this session is being recorded, and I believe that Diane also has a PDF of the session that can be posted online. So I won't hold this up for a long time, but these are just a few samples of websites that will help students and parents locate money from other sources. It might be $500, it might be $1,000, $2,500, $10,000. No matter what the amount, if you see that there's a fee charged or every student gets a scholarship, it may be some kind of ploy. Be careful, be aware that those kinds of things do exist, but if it sounds legit, you can check with the school's aid office if you'd like and kind of get confirmation. Just have your antenna up and active, I guess I would say. Kind of finally, in summarizing, make sure you know the deadlines to complete the process, whether it be the FAFSA or a scholarship application, follow-up forms. And as I mentioned earlier on, if you're looking at cost as one of the significant factors in decision-making, don't make that final decision until you know what the school will offer because you've received an award letter. Look to see how much is grant. Are they saying that all my costs will be covered, but half of it is in loans? Or 50,000 will be covered through scholarships and grants, and I only need 5,000 in loans. There can be a big difference, even though the total of financial aid is the same. One that is loan heavy, one that is grant heavy, can make all the difference in choosing the college that not only is a good fit for you academically, but is within reach financially. I provided my email address here, and I would recommend that you use that if you do have questions. You can put your daytime phone number in and I can get back to you. If you've got some more difficult questions that are kind of hard to put in email form, I'd be happy to address them that way. And it does help sometimes in the spam folder. I see that there's a D214, and I know that's not actually junk mail. So if you'd include that at the beginning of the subject line, I'd appreciate it. Diane, that's the formal presentation. Now let's go out and see what questions there may be.
Great. I want to go back a couple, just to reiterate, a couple people asked again about the FAFSA help nights, October 5th, November 10th. You will get invitations for those through email from each of your buildings very, very soon. Also had somebody ask about if they're doing the Harper Promise, do they still need to do the FAFSA? Absolutely. Not only is it a graduation requirement, but Harper for the Harper Promise program, they will require you to do the FAFSA. Several questions about 529 plans and who it's counted against. So Mark, do you want to address that?
Yeah, the 529 plan is reported as a parent asset. Okay, we've got 6 kids, 3 are gone from college. 3 of them are at home. So if I've got, let's just say $20,000 in 529 plans for each of the 3 kids, I put the total of $60,000 down on the parent investment side. And it will tell you that in the instructions. It'll give you some real details of that.
I think this should be a clarification too, because several people have asked if they can do the FAFSA before October 1st. We find this every year that students go out there, and there actually is a FAFSA application out there right now, but it is not for your seniors who will be going to college in the 2022-2023 school year. It will be the 2021-2022 FAFSA. So some
Right.
families will think we did it and we're good to go. You have to wait until after October 1st to do the 2022-2023 FAFSA.
Yeah, and there's a separate tab on that homepage after you've logged in. Do you want to do the 21-22 or 22-23? Yeah.
Right. And then there were a couple of questions too on the whole privacy. If you are doing the FAFSA, it's your student starting the FAFSA, but then the parent has to put in their financial information. Is there any way of keeping your student from seeing your financial information?
When the FAFSA is submitted, it will mask it all. When you're within the application, you can't really do that unless you're physically there trying to say, okay, Johnny, you go away. I'm going to answer the questions, and then you skip through. I shouldn't say skip. You answer the questions, hit the submit button, and then those will be masked both on the student aid report and on the visible application.
There were some questions on assets, what's included, what's not. I think just a general rule of thumb, if it's money that's in a retirement kind of account, 401k, 403b, money in your house, your car, people were asking about those are not reported on the FAFSA.
Correct.
Go ahead.
The money that you contribute, I'm sorry to interrupt, the money you contribute to a retirement plan in a given year is counted as untaxed income, but the accumulated value of the retirement account is not reported anywhere.
And, someone, again, these like twin questions or multiple student questions. I think generally the FAFSA application, when you are doing it, at least currently, this may change, but at least for the current year you'll be doing, if you have multiple students in college, your expected family contribution can be expected to be lower than if all of everything you're reporting is just for one student in college. So.
Yeah.
Typically.
And that's true for this academic year, but there are going to be some changes coming down the pike that will treat that differently.
Yes. Let's see what else here. The MAP grant, again, is only if you go to an Illinois college. So definitely, if you decide to go out of state, you would not get that Illinois MAP grant. And several people asked about, the whole listing the colleges that you want to receive the FAFSA. You certainly can go ahead and do the FAFSA after October 1st. List whatever colleges you think you are planning on applying to, even if you haven't applied there yet, you can list them in there. And I think the way the process works is until you've applied to a college, and actually, Mark, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's not until you've been accepted at that particular college, will they then go and look for a FAFSA to create a financial aid award package for you?
Right. The award letter will require that you have the admission first. A school, there may be some schools, Lake Forest is one because we're a small school. We've got an office of 3 staff. We're really pretty customer service driven. If someone were to call us and say, I submitted my FAFSA, but I haven't applied yet, can you give me a general idea of how much aid I can get? We have done that before. A big university with 50,000 students probably won't do that. But to get the official award letter from any school, you do need to be admitted.
And then the net price calculator, if you are married but filing separately, can you not use that tool? Or
You
not the net price,
can.
I mean the data retrieval tool, I'm sorry.
You cannot use the data retrieval tool if you filed separately. So you would take your 2 tax returns, combine the values, for example, adjusted gross income, tax paid, untaxed income. You take what's on husbands and wives and combine them, but you can't use the DRT. If you are married and filing jointly, if you're filing as head of household and you're single, you're not married, divorced, you're separated or divorced, then you can.
And again, in any situation where you don't feel that the information you entered into the FAFSA was going to be a true indication of your current financial situation, because you're looking at 2020 taxes, that is always when you reach out to the financial aid office to talk about extenuating situations. Maybe you've lost your job since you've filed your 2020 taxes. So definitely working with the financial aid office is recommended.
It's also common, for example, for child support to stop at high school graduation time. And so at our office, what we will do is say, what support will you receive from July 1st, this upcoming summer, through June of 2023? There may be 2 or 3 other children in the household that you're still receiving support for, but the oldest child maybe has stopped getting the benefit, or you've stopped getting it for that son or daughter. And so we would look at future child support, not past child support. If there's a rollover, I'm sorry to interrupt. Another example, if there was a rollover, a bonus that was paid out in one academic year, one calendar year, that also could be looked at by many schools.
Questions about, do we have to repay the amount that is given to us by the FAFSA? I think, first of all, that the FAFSA isn't giving you any money. It's basically the colleges. And so that FAFSA is the tool that the colleges use to determine how much money they're going to give you. And within that financial aid award, things like grants and scholarships don't have to be repaid, but the loans do have to be repaid. So you want to look at that financial aid award closely to see which money here is stuff that they're outright giving me, and which amounts are going to need to be repaid.
The federal government had made some strong suggestions about 5 years ago, I think it was, so that schools would have a little bit more common appearance in the award letters. And part of that, the government suggests, is to show how much what's the cost of school, how much is in grants and scholarships that you don't have to pay back, and how much is left at that point. Then how much is available in student loans, and how much would be left to pay after the loans are considered. So yes, you should see things like that really spelled out quite clearly. How much you really need to pay, how much is borrowed, and how much is given to you in cash, or not in cash, but how much is given to you in free money.
And again, as a parent of sent kids through college as well, I think it's a little scary to think about that you're not going to know that those full financial aid award packages until probably April of senior year. So I definitely recommend using those net price calculators that are on the websites. You can even be doing that now before the FAFSA opens on October 1st. Go to the websites of the colleges, plug in some of the numbers and try to really get a good idea of how much money you can expect to get in grants or scholarships or whatever.
Diane, I'd be curious to know, at Lake Forest, we begin sending out award letters to admitted students around the first part of December. Is your experience that quite a few schools wait until the spring, like you said about in April?
Yes, unfortunately, there's not a standard time. And I think families start to panic a little when they may have gotten one or two of their financial aid award packages already, and they're waiting and waiting to hear on the remaining ones. But definitely there are some schools that usually by about April 1st, but
Okay,
sometimes it is right up to that deadline.
all right.
All right, a very lots of specific questions. So in interest of time and in trying to get too specific, hopefully we covered most of the general questions. Again, I encourage you to reach out to Mark or to your post-secondary counselor in your building. Come to our FAFSA help nights. Definitely when you're in the FAFSA, there's a lot of help within that too, to click on things, to get a little bit more description of what they're asking for. So I think that's about all I have here, Mark. Do you have any that came in?
I did not see any myself.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Mark, for your wealth of information. And we will be sending out this recording in the next few days. And I know there's a lot of information tonight, so you may feel like you want to rewatch some sections. So thank you so much.